So biophysics of creation. This is part 1. So part 2 gets into the L.M.T body, but today we're going to focus on biophysics. So does anyone know what biophysics is? Just by chance, anyone? Yeah.
It'd be like the physics of how living things operate, right?
Yes. Yep. So, oh, it's not that button. It's this button. There's this. Free use. A little bit about me, of course. Everyone probably knows my name is Alphonzo Monzo III. I started out studying electrical engineering. Basically, I went to seminary and got sick. Kind of interesting how that works. But medicine didn't really have a whole lot for me, and they weren't helping. So because of my background, I was kind of interested in more natural medicine. So I went that avenue, and it probably took about a year, but I was basically back to normal. And I didn't have to have my large intestine cut out and thrown away like they wanted to do. And because of that, my background, I wanted to study more on the electromagnetic systems of the body because my background was electrical engineering. So I started doing that. And then I still got my Master's of Divinity, and I went to medical school and got my pre-med, and then went and got my naturopathic. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. And then in about 2009 is when I learned more about Torah. And I started making a connection between systems that I have learned in the past and how they relate to the Hebrew alphabet. So we're going to get into that more tomorrow. But today we're going to kind of lay the foundation of all this. So my attempt is... Oh, no. Don't do that yet. Nope. To make a really, really complicated field as simple as I can. Okay? So this first one, there's 2 videos here. So this first one's going to be more on EMFs and the electromagnetic spectrum.
Something surrounds you, bombards you, some of which you can't see, touch, or even feel. Every day, everywhere you go. It is odorless and tasteless, yet you use it and depend on it every hour of every day. Without it, the world you know could not exist. What is it? Electromagnetic radiation. These waves spread across a spectrum from very short gamma rays to X-rays, ultraviolet rays, visible light waves, even longer infrared waves, microwaves, to radio waves which can measure longer than a mountain range. This spectrum is the foundation of the information age and of our modern world. Your radio, remote control, text message, television, microwave oven, even a doctor's X-ray, all depend on waves within the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic waves, or EM waves, are similar to ocean waves in that both are energy waves. They transmit energy. EM waves are produced by the vibration of charged particles and have electrical and magnetic properties. But unlike ocean waves that require water, EM waves travel through the vacuum of space at the constant speed of light. EM waves have crests and troughs like ocean waves. The distance between crests is the wavelength. While some EM wavelengths are very long and are measured in meters, many are tiny and are measured in billionths of a meter, nanometers. The number of these crests that pass a given point within 1 second is described as the frequency of the wave. One wave, or cycle, per second is called a hertz. Long EM waves, such as radio waves, have the lowest frequency and carry less energy. Adding energy increases the frequency of the wave and makes the wavelength shorter. Gamma rays are the shortest, highest energy waves in the spectrum. So, as you sit watching TV, Not only are there visible light waves from the TV striking your eyes, but also radio waves transmitting from a nearby station, and microwaves carrying cell phone calls and text messages, and waves from your neighbor's Wi-Fi, and GPS units in the cars driving by. There is a chaos of waves from all across the spectrum passing through your room right now. With all these waves around you, how can you possibly watch your TV show? Similar to tuning a radio to a specific radio station, our eyes are tuned to a specific region of the EM spectrum and can detect energy with wavelengths from 400 to 700 nanometers, the visible light region of the spectrum. Objects appear to have color because EM waves interact with their molecules. Some wavelengths in the visible spectrum are reflected, and other wavelengths are absorbed. This leaf looks green because EM waves interact with the chlorophyll molecules. Waves between 492 and 577 nanometers in length are reflected, and our eye interprets this as the leaf being green. Our eyes see the leaf as green, but cannot tell us anything about how the leaf reflects ultraviolet, microwave, or infrared waves. To learn more about the world around us, scientists and engineers have devised ways to enable us to see beyond that sliver of the EM spectrum called visible light.
Really picky. So, defining some terms. And I'm going to pick this back up again. Well, maybe I will get into this since I'm here. I'm going to give you a mathematical equation that explains the Hebrew, the unified field theory, quantum physics, and the electric universe. And here's the mathematical equation. The L.F.T. So this is just all different views. Basically, unified field basically is saying there's one field, and the reality is there is only one field, and that is the field of ether. Now, we break that up into 4 different ones, but the reality is they're not 4 different fields. They're only one field, and we would call that the dielectric, the electric, the magnetism, and gravity, which are not really 4 different things. They're all one expression of the ether in different forms. So in the reality, the unified field theory, that's supposed to say field, not filed. And I did the same thing there. I was trying to go fast, but that's supposed to say field. So now it's bugging me and I want to fix it, but I'll just move on. Anyway, so what they're basically doing is they have realized that the reality is there's only one creator. And he's only created one field, and everything else that we see is an expression of that one field. So in quantum physics, I don't really believe much in quantum physics. So when I use the word quantum, I'm meaning very small. Just like nanoparticles. So nanoparticles are really small, quantum is really small. There's really no such thing as quantum physics because quantum physics is just observing principles of the invisible creation, and they really can't quantify really any of it because you can't even see it. So everyone knows that an atom, no one's ever seen an atom. So how can you tell me what makes up an atom if you've never seen an atom? You don't know. So the only thing they can do is observe principles of the invisible principles of the creation. They can observe them and they have some principles, but everything else is just made up. And when those principles become something we can actually see and measure, it's in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then you have the orders of matter or creation. There's actually 4 levels of matter. You got plasma, gas, liquid, solid. But of course, plasma is formed out of the ether. And the ether comes from the Aleph-Tav, and the Aleph-Tav comes from the source Yah. So of course, there's 7 layers of how you take something from the source and it becomes filtered through the spirit into the ether, into light, through the gas, liquid, and solid. So this is what we can observe, a little bit of ether. All the geniuses like Tesla and Heaviside, Steinmetz, Eric Dollard, all these men, somewhat of, what's the other guy? Magnetism, Maxwell. They all believed that there was an ether. They all say it. Only Einstein, who just drew numbers, didn't believe in the ether, but they all believe that there's an ether, and the ether forms everything else. And now what's really interesting is if you get into Genesis 2, where he says, and Yah created light, or said, let there be light, and there was light, the word is or. The crazy thing is, you need to get used to doing, the Hebrew is, and sorry, I like using paleo, Aleph, Vav, Resh. So if we were going to do that in modern form, or. Now the problem is most people look things up in the Strong's, which is pathetic because Strong's really doesn't tell you anything. But if you look it up in an etymological dictionary like Klein's, it's going to give you a different definition. It's going to say that it's air, ventilation, order, fire, enlighten, or to light. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like the light that I'm familiar with. That sounds a lot like ether. And there's different Hebrew words for light, like menorah, which actually means light that comes off of an object, so a candle or a lamp. So whatever this word or is not the type of light that we typically think of it. It is light, but it's much more than just light. And ether does eventually become light. This gets really crazy. But basically when the ether comes into inertia, it forms the dielectric. And there's two modalities of ether, dielectric and magnetism. That's it. Everything else is an expression of those two things. So when you take the dielectric and the magnetism and mix it together, you have electromagnetic. When it loses its electric property, then it's just a really strong magnet. All right, so the ether, when you have loss of inertia, becomes dielectric. And what happens is as that continues, the dielectric, upon acceleration, basically creates a longitudinal dielectric pulse, which is magnetism. And that's the expression of the loss of ether is the expression of something becoming more and more dense. So there really is no such thing as magnetism. Magnetism is the expression of how the ether is losing inertia and becoming more dense, and therefore it becomes solid and false because it's not as light as light. So that's the expression of magnetism in a way, kind of more simplified. But they're all expressions of the same thing, ether, or we could say eventually electromagnetism. So getting into that, the electromagnetic spectrum, everything's made up of this. And defining more words, we should define the word radiation and frequency. In our language in America here, we just throw around these words and we really don't know meanings. And we say everything has a frequency. Well, that's true and false. Frequency is a measurement. So yes, technically everything has a frequency, but that's not technically correct. Everything is energy, yes. But in Europe, they're going to use the word radiation, and it means the same thing as energy that we use here. So in Europe, when they're talking radiation, you don't think of radiation just as you're going to get turned into the Incredible Hulk because, you got mutated. No, radiation is anything on the electromagnetic spectrum. It's interchangeable for the word energy. And frequency is just a measurement of cycles per second. So a frequency really isn't a thing, it's a measurement of a thing. Does that make sense? What did I do with it? Yeah, see, I just said it right there. I'm ahead of myself. That's a good thing. Electron volts. Oh, okay, yeah, good. I did do it right. You have to be careful when you talk about the stuff that you're talking about capital EMF, because there is a lowercase EMF, which is a electromotor force, which is not an electromagnetic field. Why they named both things the same with 3 initials, I have no idea, but I don't write these things up, so it's crazy. But anything in the electromagnetic spectrum will have an electromagnetic field or frequency. It's measurable. Now, some things we actually measure as frequency and some things we measure as wavelength. Usually, if you get into sounds, we're measuring in frequency. If you get into colors, we're measuring in wavelength. But they're both a measurement of something in the electromagnetic spectrum. So anything that has a motor, a battery, moving parts, runs on an AC current. And of course, Nikola Tesla invented AC current. And that current will then produce an electromagnetic field around it, which could be measured in frequency, maybe wavelength, depending. And what's important is these, you can't really call them a wave because a wave is a description of something. I'm waving. The wave doesn't tell you what something is. So they throw these words around loosely, but it's going to carry information on that vibration, to put it more correctly. Therefore, everything does produce or is made up of an electromagnetic field or an electromagnetic frequency. But there is a difference between natural and man-made EMFs. So we're going to get into the difference between these. I'm not going to get in a lot to electrical devices and how they affect the body in detail, but it will give you a better understanding of how they can affect the body, because most people don't really research this the correct way. It's not there. Sorry. You can't read that well, but in the electromagnetic spectrum, there's a division between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. So this is the normal stuff we're usually exposed to, and this is where you get into the more dangerous rays like X-rays and gamma rays, which turn you into the Incredible Hulk, or probably just really kill you and annihilate you. And then you have your nukes and everything over here. So ionizing radiation is how it's going to heat the tissue. So most technology today, or most research, is only looking in how all of our modern equipment, or technology I should say, heats the tissue. And then they say, well, non-ionizing radiation doesn't heat your tissue, so it's safe. We're going to address that. Man, that thing's really specific. So everything found in nature has a field and frequency, which we could label as an EMF. These fields are very subtle, and we are somewhat still limited to being able to fully measure them, or at least at the general population. So when you get to people who have millions and millions and millions of dollars, they have very fancy equipment that can measure really, really subtle frequencies and fields, but most of us don't have that kind of money to play around with these things. So we can only really measure things that are more like man-made, that are easier to measure. Our body has been designed to live with and respond correctly to these types of frequencies in the natural environment. All EMFs are sending information, since information is part of a frequency. Therefore, there's always a communication between both natural items and man-made items taking place, even if we don't realize it, sense it, or understand it from a chemical perspective. So this is something I'm going to talk about a lot. You have to remember that matter, that's chemistry matter, doesn't really matter to energy. All chemistry is made up of energy. Man, you are picky. Natural EMFs produce proper communication with our body, and that's called in-phase coherence. Man-made EMFs produce out-of-phase incoherence, which means your body's ability to communicate properly is messed up. So man-made EMFs can be measured easily by the general population. All you need is a tri-field meter, and you can measure the EMFs of man-made technology. Yeah. Natural chemicals versus synthetic chemicals. So this is another thing to really think about that is a dilemma for a lot of people, and that is On a chemical level, they can synthetically create a substance. Let's say vitamin C. So let's say this was an orange plant, and we took the orange and they took the vitamin C out of the orange and they analyzed it on a chemical level, and they can see, okay, this is vitamin C, and then they synthesize and they make synthetic vitamin C. Well, the thing that most people don't realize is, from a chemical perspective, it looks identical to real vitamin C. However, if you can look at the energy field of the vitamin C, it won't look like this nice perfect plant. It will look all distorted because, yeah, it's out of phase and it doesn't have the same information that created it. So your body cannot actually use it. It doesn't know what to do with it because it wasn't designed to be ran off of that synthetic chemical. If you think this is crazy, this is cyclotronic resonance. So this is something that was proven probably back in, 80s. And basically, the premise was when you have an electric field and a magnetic field, it creates a spinning of particles, if particles actually even really exist the way we think of them. And what happens is it can create the ability for information then to be transferred from the chemical to the body. That's basically what this is saying. Because it creates a spiraling effect. And it actually can create a change on anything that works off of positive and negative ions in the body. So all of your cells have something called an electropotential, where these channels in the body on the cells that open up and close, and usually what sets it off is electropotential across the cell membrane, which basically is a fancy word that you change the polarity, and the change in polarity opens up that gate, and then these charged ions like sodium, calcium, magnesium, potassium enter or leave the cell. And what they have found is this cyclotronic resonance, which just means you have a strong enough magnetic field, a strong enough electric field, can actually cause information from that field to be transferred to the body and affect your cell's ability to open and close. And you don't need much. In fact, just the magnetic field of the Earth is enough to create that effect. And then different chemicals need more or less magnetic to electric field for that to take place. But this is just one way of explaining how man-made devices actually do affect the cell, even on a chemical level, because it creates an electropotential. And I have another teaching sometimes I do called the electromagnetic man, and in there I get more into all the research that has been done over centuries to explain how man-made EMFs affect the body. And if you don't know, some people today have something called EHS, which is electromagnetic hypersensitivities. So just like someone who is really allergic to, peanut or whatever food you want to say, these people are deathly allergic to electromagnetic fields that are man-made. So they usually, when it's really bad, they can't leave their house, they can't have a cell phone, they can't have Wi-Fi. They actually really do wear foil hats. Of course, it doesn't actually look like foil. It's just metal particles interlaced into the garment to try to shield themselves. So they're really bad off. And most people don't know this, but Nikola Tesla was the first person with electromagnetic hypersensitivities. He got so bad that he said he used to be able to hear the ticking of a clock from 3 rooms away like it was a hammer on his head. He had to put tennis balls on all his chairs in his bed because just cars going down the road, the vibration affected him so badly. He became really super sensitive because of his experiments with AC current. That's one of the things no one wants to talk about. They want to talk about free energy, but they don't want to talk about what he actually did to himself and what we're doing to ourselves, and who gave him all this knowledge. Because someone was speaking to him, because I don't know if you knew this about Nikola Tesla, but he never actually sat down and wrote anything out. If you read all his writings, he basically just told you the idea popped into his head and he could see it and then he built it. And it's like, that's weird. Where did that thought come from? Exactly. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the biophysics. So bio is obviously body or biology or life. So the physics of life, the energy of life. So in life, what you want is proper communication. Everything comes down to this. So here's some waves or whatever, longitudinal vibrational EMF field. And you can see one is in phase coherent, so it looks all nice. And of course, what does that mean? It means the message will be received and understood because there's proper communication. Everyone kind of knows these nuances of coherent. If you say someone was coherent, you could understand them well, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to not be incoherent. Out of phase incoherence, you can see the waves are all jammed up. And then the message is not completely received or misunderstood. So think of this example of you're driving down the road listening to the radio and you go underneath a bridge. And what happens? You get this. That's out of phase incoherence. The signal is no longer, or it's been interrupted, so you either did not receive the message correctly or you didn't understand the message correctly because something was lost. Like the phrase lost in translation. We get a lot of that today too. So basic principles of how the body works. Einstein, or not Einstein. What am I talking about? Tesla. Everything is energy, frequency, and vibration. So everything in the body does actually have a frequency, or we should say an energetic signature. I'll get to that. Instead of biophysics, some people say bioelectric, bioenergetics, energy medicine. There's all these catchphrases and stuff, but they're all basically saying the same thing. So bioelectric systems work via communication. These systems circulate and function as resonators of frequency, which is force, motion, movement, and information. Think about Genesis for a minute. Someone was moving and vibrating, and he had a bunch of information, which manifested into the physical body. The unseen always creates the seen. So I have here the example of the shadow DNA. And shadow DNA is something a lot of the physicists have found, which is, I'm not going to call it a hologram. I don't know what other word to say, but you can see a chemical DNA structure. However, they also found that along with that is an exact representation in an electromagnetic field. That's not chemistry, but it looks just like the DNA, but it's energetic. And that's where the real information comes from. The subtle energy systems do not like to be stimulated, meaning forced stimulation. They prefer proper resonation. And I'll get into more of that here in a minute. So this is an interesting chart. But basically what we're going to explain here is that there are different types of energy in the body. Okay? And tomorrow I'm going to get more into counterfeits and New Age and what they've done to all this. But most of these pathways have actually existed. And I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, but I get into how they've actually been measured throughout time. But all energy systems are actually connected. We continue to discover more. But basically all they are different levels of manifestation, from pure energy being spiritual into the physical solids or the body, just like what I was explaining here. So basically all these people are saying the same thing, but because of their belief system, they don't know they're actually just identifying one creator and one fingerprint throughout all of this stuff. And that's all they're really figuring out is, oh, there's one fingerprint on everything. Oh, I wonder who that is. Tesla, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in the terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, not matter. Can't see that well. So there are things called chakras. Yes, they do exist. But most of the information on chakras are very perverted. There are things called acupuncture points and meridians. They do exist. There's the King Institute method. which was one method that I studied, which is kind of the history of the L.F.T body. There's only 2 other systems out there teaching the points and pathways that the L.F.T body teaches, and that's the King Institute and Jinzen Jitsu. They both came from Japan, and they were both Hebrew-based. And the oldest records we know came from Moses. That's what the Japanese say themselves. And that system has pretty much been lost, and it's much deeper than all these other systems. We'll get to that more probably tomorrow. I can't even read that. Can you see that? Most energy has something, something, something. Oh.
Because they're filming, so maybe
I know what it says.
turn the lights back on.
I can maybe read it on that one if my eyes are good enough. It says most energy systems use one of the above systems. Okay. And there's a lot of other things in energy medicine like vibrational medicine, magnetism, homeopathy, frequency, hands-on. All of them are using the electromagnetic spectrum in some way with the body. And typically what has happened is, since I'm the witch doctor, and that's what everyone always says when they don't know what someone's talking about. But basically what has happened is the church has not done their job, and they have not studied. So what happened is the New Agers and the Buddhists and all these other people came in, and they said, okay, if you're not going to understand these things and define them, we will. So they perverted all of this stuff, and they have redefined all of it. So then when you go online and you look something up, you see some weird stuff. But it doesn't mean what they are saying has anything to do with the truth. It could just be a perversion of what is actually naturally there, which is the electromagnetic spectrum and how the body works accordingly. So that's what happens. Reminds me of Mighty Python. A witch! A witch! How do you know she's a witch? She looks like one. If it looks like paganism, it must be paganism. Not always. You know what's interesting about the pagans? They eat, they drink, and they breathe. They have sex. So no more sex, no more breathing, no more eating. You know what? The pagans die too, so you're not allowed to die. We can go down this road all day long. All they do is counterfeit the real thing. They don't make anything unique. They just counterfeit and pervert. So we have to be very careful that we are not going to blaspheme the spirit, because the spirit is behind making a lot of these things, and then we're going to call him Satan. Who are we attacking? So it isn't today. So this is Dr. Reinhold Vold, German doctor, scientist. So he's the first person to want to see if he could measure acupuncture points or energy points in the body. And basically what he's using a very simple, fancy ohm meter. Just like in electrical engineering, an ohm meter is something where you can measure, well, it's a generic word, but usually a meter is a meter that you can use to measure voltage, current, and resistance. So basically what he was doing is measuring the resistance at acupuncture points. And he found something really unique. Every time he measured an acupuncture point, there was 100 times more resistance than non-acupuncture points. Every time. And he went, there's something here. So then he teamed up with a French doctor. Oh, and this isn't correct anymore. I used to say 60 years, and that might have been almost 20 years ago now. So we're talking about almost 80 years ago. He proved these things, and still you don't hear it being taught in modern medicine. In fact, you've talked to most doctors who are going to say, oh, these systems don't exist, and they're all New Age. Yep. Well, that's not true. They've been measured for over 80 years. He also noticed that when he was testing people, and he had a reading, people kept doing something that created the reading to all of a sudden change. And he was like, well, that's weird, and then it would come back. And so he started observing what people did. And he had all kinds of supplements on his shelf. And what he found out was people would look at his supplements and be interested and pick one up. And when they picked one up, the reading changed. Because your body is always interacting with everything around it electromagnetically, whether you know it or not. As soon as you go to touch something, as soon as you get close to someone's body field, there's a communication. That's why we can sense things about people. Okay? What do you think animals do? Animals pick up on these things very easily. Okay? So as soon as you touch something, the information from that electromagnetic field is already communicating with your body. And your body is already going to know yes or no. Whether you know it or not, which is how a lie detector test works. We'll get into that maybe sometime. Hopefully. Someday. Here's the French guy. So what they did is they teamed up and they used radioactive isotopes. So anyone familiar with that? So this is where they use, most people are more familiar with digestive testing, where they make you drink the chalk-like substance and it's radioactive and it goes through your body. And what they can do is that it gives them the ability to see into the body and see what's going on in the digestive tract, to see where it gets stopped. So they did something really great. They decided to inject people with radioactive isotopes into acupuncture points and non-points. And of course, when they injected them into the points, guess what? The energy moved along a pathway that we can't see with the naked eye. And when they injected them into non-points, they went nowhere. So all this talk about these points don't exist, they exist. So now you're left with a question. Who put them there?
Yeah.
That's right. Do you think the body works any different than the universe? Everything in the universe is electromagnetism. Doesn't matter if we call it the ether or the magnetic or dielectric or electric or gravity. It doesn't matter. It's all expressions of magnetism. And if you can change the fields of magnetism, you can change the weight and the gravity, which is why we've had people who built amazing things that we can't figure out how they built. And there's a recent one like, right, Coral Castle. How many people have seen Coral Castle? This wasn't that long ago. This guy built this whole coral castle. Was it out in Florida or somewhere? Yeah. When these coral stones, there are tons, thousands of tons of weight, and he moved them and placed them all by his own two hands. No one helped him. In fact, he moved the whole castle once. Yeah, 10 miles. No one knows how he does it or did it. Although what was left behind was some type of bicycle that was set up to electromagnetic circuit. So he was creating some type of EMF field that made the rocks light so he could move them. Because all you have to do is alter the EMFs and you alter gravity. In fact, we're going to talk more about that tomorrow on how the body's weight can actually change. There's also anatomical proof. Now, these slides are more from the L.F.T points, which are much harder to measure. You can't really measure them with electrical meter because in explaining this, a lot of the energy systems, like acupuncture, are way down here. The acupuncture points, we now know, are liquid crystal molecules found in the connective tissue. So light is transferred from one liquid crystal to another in the connective tissue, but it's very electric, so you can measure it. The L.F.T body system, on the other hand, is way up here. I would almost call it plasma energy, which is basically light traveling through other means. And it's the seed or the roots. And then out of that system form all the other systems like the meridians and the acupuncture points and the chakras. Those are all downstream. But there is anatomical proof. Epidermis is the outer layer of skin, and the dermis is the inner layer of skin. And typically, the only problem with this is it's magnified at 100 times, which you need, but I would like to get another picture because typically these dermal papillae would look like this, or this is even one right here, probably a normal one. And they're going to be spread out from like maybe one here and one here, normally on the surface of the skin. However, the dead center of a point is here. And as you get closer to that point, interesting happens. And that is these get longer towards the surface of the skin, and they get closer together. Almost like there's a network of these papillae that become closer together and bigger and longer at a center of a point. And in these papillae, you have both capillaries for circulation, but a lot of nerve tissue wrappings. So they're highly tied into the nervous system. You actually do have the same thing with acupuncture points, but this is actually a different point. So for proper health, you need proper circulation and resonation, which means proper health and wellness. So you think of the systems as water flowing, almost like more like up here. You almost have like this plasma that carries light through the body, and it's not really liquid and it's not really a gas. It's more of a plasma, but the best way to illustrate it in terms that we can think of as a hose. And what happens is you get places in the body where it gets congested. And what does that create? Well, it creates two problems, two symptoms. On one side, you have a lack of energy flowing, not enough, weakened state. And on the other side, you have a buildup of pressure. And this causes incoherence, which then means information is not getting broadcast throughout the body. And if the chemistry doesn't get the information, the chemistry is not going to work right. So this gets into the structural organization of the body. Now, typically in the medical field or in an anatomy physiology book or any of these books, you're going to see what's here in the white, the little white box. And they're going to say that the deepest level is chemical. And the chemicals come together to form cells, and cells come together to form tissues, and tissues, organ systems, and then that's you. And the problem is that's all matter, what is seen and measurable. But that's the hardware of the body. And the reality is there's a whole nother level beyond that, which is the informational level of the body, which is electromagnetic communication. That's the body's software, and it's unseen. And then you have the L.F.T body, which is the Hebrew letters resonating correctly, giving all the information to the informational level, which then creates the physical body and keeps it animated and functioning and working. And the great thing about this perspective, if people can understand it, is it completely, again, does away with evolution nonsense. Because in evolution, you have to somehow have chemicals kind of bumping into each other and somehow forming a cell. But once you understand that the chemicals are made up from the informational level, which is not only information, but energy as in power, like a battery, then you realize someone all-powerful and all-knowing had to develop the software. Because the hardware only runs off of the software. There had to be a programmer. There had to be some intelligent design. It can't just be a bunch of things bumping into each other. It doesn't work. Good. So this is going to be a cool one. So this is going to be a presentation on how sound waves, which is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, can affect matter.
The film you're about to see has no characters. If you spare a little of your imagination, it is a film to describe to you the effect of cymatic frequencies on matter. everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound.
Well, if you break down that word in the pictographic form, strong first, Vav is a connector, and Resh is the head. So, or the word they use for light in Genesis 2, which actually means all these things, means the strong connector or connection to the head. And you just saw a bunch of different types of plasma and a Nikolai Tesla coil. And they put those suits on because if without those suits, they would have been destroyed. Much like the priests, the priests had to have special garments that didn't allow them to sweat much, and they had to have their feet bare because when you go in the presence of Yah, if you didn't, you'd be annihilated because you have to be grounded. That's why they didn't wear shoes. And then you notice anytime anyone came into the presence of Yah, they had to take off their shoes. Yeah, it's all electromagnetism again. Okay, yeah, this is just explaining more. I think there's another screen that. So the Creator produces or provides the breath of life, light, force, movement, information, spirit, which basically creates the software of the body. And then the software of the body controls the physical aspect of the body. Okay, so matter doesn't matter to energy. It's all electromagnetic communication. This is how the body really works. The ultimate cause is the bioelectric communication. Now, we could call this the body's software. Now, once the body's software gets messed up, it creates a domino effect. And it can cause problems on the chemical level, the cellular level, and so forth. This is how all the man-made technology can affect the body, and things like scar tissue, toxins, injuries, emotions. Someone in this room talks a lot about the living stones and how we are living stones. And if you remember, we are also what? The living tabernacle, the temple. And there's certain part of the temple is an altar, and the altar was supposed to be made out of living stones, not huge stones. And one of the premises there, kind of hidden in plain sight, was you were not to mark or cut upon the living stones. And the same thing is true for our body. If we cut upon our body, we create scar tissue, and scar tissue messes up with the communication of these pathways. So there are different types of materials, but the Bible tells us that. He just didn't tell us why, but he just said don't do it. So it's all about, I kind of said that already. The question should always be, how far up do we go to find the true cause? And this kind of talks a little bit about the testing I do with the Quest 4. It's biofeedback, frequency testing. The problem is most of us get stuck in the chemistry world too much. So, and of course, all modern medicine, all they can do is address you on the chemical level because they don't believe anything exists beyond the chemical level. And it's easier to manipulate. Yeah. Phantom pain. I don't know if you can see these pictures, but this is a leaf with Carillion photography, that's what it's called, which is a way to see the energetic field of the leaf. And what happened here is the leaf was cut, and they took a picture, and as you can see, it's a little distorted, but the pattern is still there. Because energy cannot be created or destroyed, the law of conservation of energy. So even if you get rid of part of the physical body, the energetic system is still there, and that's what phantom pain is. You can cut a limb off and it doesn't matter. The energy systems through that limb still exist, and you can still feel pulses there even though the limb's not there. You can still get proper resonation because the limb's not there. And most likely they're having phantom pain because all pain is a signal telling your body that something in the body, energy, is not flowing and it's congested.
Animals that can regenerate limbs, are they have a way that they're tapping into that field that's still there that allows them to regenerate that?
Yes. And Dr. Becker did experiments with that in salamanders, and he used magnets and small current of DC electricity to regrow their limbs faster. Yeah. We're almost there, but not quite. And then, of course, you have the phantom DNA, which actually makes up the real DNA. And the phantom DNA is actually made up of the Aleph-Tav body, or the Aleph-Tav letters. We'll get into that tomorrow. I kind of already said this, frequencies are measured in cycles per second, but we should really call them energetic signatures, not frequencies, because an energetic signature of a substance is made up of hundreds of frequencies. And it's like an energetic fingerprint. So every substance has an energetic signature that makes it unique from every other substance, just like a fingerprint. So you can identify any substance by its energetic fingerprint. In fact, all of us have that too. Everybody has an energetic signature, which is an assortment of everything that we are. And that is recorded in your DNA, and it always goes with your DNA, no matter where your DNA is taken. So even if someone takes blood out of you and takes it across the other side of the world, if something is done to you, your blood reacts, because it's always tied to you wirelessly through the body energetic field. Yeah, in quantum physics, they call it quantum entanglement. Some people, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance because he didn't know anything. It's longitudinal waves like light. So if you think of a wave, a rope, and I do this, it's transverse. You notice it takes time for this wave to get from one side to the other side. A longitudinal would be if I picked up this and someone had the other side and I pushed them, it's instant. Longitudinal is always connected. Something happens here, it instantly affects something somewhere else. And your body's like that. So we really have to consider what a lot of people believe about donating organs and blood, because obviously your body doesn't accept donated organs. It tries to reject them. And I don't know if you've heard all the stories about how someone takes on all the characteristics of the person who gave the organ. That's because it's always connected. So blood donations, organ donations, you're actually creating soul ties, because the life is in the blood, and the Hebrew there for blood or the life is soul. The soul is in the blood. All your DNA is always connected to you no matter where it goes. And the military did experiments on this. That's how we know that. Hopefully one more principle before I run out of time, and that's the Shem. So in Hebrew, there's a word called Shem, and that means a name. Hashem means the name. But what is a name? I use this acronym, NICE. Names are nice. What does that stand for? The nature, the identity, the character, and the essence is what a name is. Names have nothing to do with how you pronounce them. The ancient Hebrew was pictographs. How do you pronounce a picture? No one knows how to pronounce anything in Hebrew, really, unless you have the actual recording. Think about this just for 1 second. Yah spoke the Hebrew language, so it's part of Yah. It came from Yah. We can't understand Yah because we're not him. So how do we think we know how to pronounce his name correctly when we're not him? You'd have to be as smart as him to know how to pronounce his name correctly, technically. There might be 1,000 ways to pronounce his name, and maybe none of them contradict. Now, we think, oh, that's impossible. Yeah, but we're in a different dimension. In another dimension, all those 1,000 ways of pronouncing his name might all still be part of the truth from different perspectives. We're not as smart as we think. But a name has to do with the nature, the identity, the character, and the essence. So there's two types of Jesus, isn't there? There's the pansy hippie Jesus running around talking about fake love. That's not the identity and character and essence of the true Jesus, Yeshua, who kept the Torah and died. And think about it. He actually didn't live for us. He died for us. Because he is the Word made flesh. Therefore, living, he had to be naturally perfect because he is perfect. He is the Word. So he didn't live for us. That's why we have to still live how he told us to live. He died for us. There's a difference. Oh. Congratulations, we made it. This is part 2. Oh, let me say that. So an energetic signature in nature, or the energetic signature, which we can measure, a frequency or a vibration, is the nature, identity, character, and essence of a particular substance. Because the language of physics is math and numbers. And Hebrew is numbers. Hebrew letters and numbers are the same thing. You can't separate them. So a name has an energetic signature, which is its nature, identity, character, and essence. That's going to be important for when we talk tomorrow and we get into how the Hebrew letters are on the body.